With me right now is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, we've been watching you for months now, and I wonder how this fits into the context of what you've been investigating as ranking Democrat on that committee.
Well, here's my concern. You have a president whose associates are under investigation by the FBI. You have an attorney general who is supposed to have recused himself from decisions over the Russia investigation, making a recommendation to the president to fire that chief investigator, and the president taking that recommendation. It raises a whole host of conflicts of interest and questions about whether this is simply brazen interference with a criminal investigation. I don't think anyone in the country can have any confidence that Donald Trump wasn't thinking, what's the impact on my exposure by firing Comey? And he must have concluded that he was better off without him than with him at the helm. And that is deeply troubling. I think it underscores just how essential it is that we have an independent prosecutor appointed immediately.
Let's look at that balance, the very sharp balance there. It seems to me that, what was your view as a professional, as an attorney, as a member of Congress and ranking Democrat on that committee, ranking member? What did you think of Comey's ability to get to the bottom of this case with the Russian involvement? Was he going to do it?
Well, you know, first of all, I shared a lot of the reservations that the deputy AG set out in terms of Director Comey's handling of the Clinton email investigation, particularly what he did in October. Yeah. So I understand that. I concur with a lot of those criticisms. At the same time, though, for this president, who applauded those statements and actions by Director Comey, to take this action now just calls into question, you know, what is this really about? And I think, you know, people are going to jump to the conclusion, and perhaps properly so, that this is all about the Russian investigation, which he has called a fake. And now he's getting rid of the head of the FBI who's conducting that investigation. You know, I certainly had mixed feelings about the director, given his conduct of the Clinton email investigation, but I have profound concerns about a president who is so deeply conflicted in terms of his interests, making this kind of a judgment.
Well, back to my question. Do you think that he was going to do a good job of investigating the Russian deal? Comey.
You know, I think...
Did you have faith in him to do that?
I think that one of the salutary impacts of the House investigation was really providing oversight to make sure that the director and the FBI were taking this matter seriously. I had more confidence that was happening after our open hearing and than I did before. And nonetheless, you know, it was something that I think we needed to continue to monitor and stay on top of, and question the director about whether he had chased down this lead or that lead. This is part of what we're able to do in closed session. But nonetheless, even with the misgivings I had about the director, the fact that this president and this attorney general have made this decision harkens back, I think, to some of the decisions that were equally tainted by President Nixon.
Yes, well, let's take a look at that series of developments. We had Nunes, your chairman for a while, who basically humiliated himself by that wild goose chase, that midnight ride down to the EOB, and coming back with the same material, and then going back the next morning to the president with what he'd gotten from the president's people. That confounded any confidence people would have in him in this investigation. Then yesterday, I thought, stellar testimony from Sally Yates, the acting attorney general, who brought the information about the Russian connection through Michael Flynn to the president's people, to his attorney in the White House, and she was pushed back basically and criticized for doing her job. The pattern here, it looks much better for the people prosecuting this case or trying to get the truth than it does for the people trying to cover it up. Certainly, I think, is that fair?
Well, you know, when you look at the pattern, Sally Yates did her job. She got fired by President Trump. Director Comey was investigating something the president described as a fake. He got fired. You know, it doesn't, you know, particularly enhance your career prospects, I guess, to take action that the president decides is not in his very personal interest. That's not a quality you look for in a president. You look for a president to have an independent Justice Department, an independent FBI, and I think that's been very much thrown into question by this president's actions.
He comes from the private sector, from a company he owns and controls, and he had a TV show for years, very successful TV show, where he fired people. Do you get the sense that Trump believes that anyone who causes him any kind of chafing, any kind of discomfort, that he does have sort of the monarchical right to fire?
I think he does view it that way. He has very little appreciation for how a system of checks and balances works. And, one of the things that we are finding, much to our peril, is this system of democracy and checks and balances that we think is so firmly entrenched is actually quite fragile. And when you have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't observe any of the norms of behavior that we're used to in a president, we see, just where the weaknesses are institutionally in our system. And I do think it's incumbent on Congress, I hope both Democrats and Republicans, to insist upon an independent prosecutor here. There's simply no way, I think, the public is going to have confidence that this president is going to voluntarily absent himself from any further interference in the investigation.
There was another iconic event, Congressman, the last couple of days. That was the trip in the bus. Not the other bus, not the Access Hollywood bus, but this bus, where all the Republican members who voted for the president on the health bill all trooped down to the White House to get their pat on the back from the president. I don't know how these things connect, but if I were doing deep history, I would say, you know what? That was another indication that the balance of checks and balances in our system isn't really working. When members of the House of Representatives who got elected on their own, who put together their political careers on their own, who do their job on their own, felt that they should come down to the White House. There they are, the picture of them, giggling as like kids who've been rewarded by the school principal, getting a holiday. They're all grinning, and I don't know. Do they understand the system of checks and balances when they work with you on this investigation? Do they get it?
Well, I do think that my colleagues on the committee and Mike Conaway are serious about the investigation. I do have to say, though, watching that spectacle at the White House, I found it so disturbing that people thought that passing a bill that cuts off tens of millions of people from health insurance is something to be celebrated, like a frat party. It really was appalling, and it says more about how they view this as a game than it does about whether they're focused on the public benefit.
Well said. Thank you so much, U.S. Congressman Adam Schiff of California, ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Let's go back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.